The Book of Enoch, about the fallen watchers, the human women, the bloodthirsty giants. Should Christians read it? Since Jude quotes it, why is it not included in the Bible as part of the canon?
Sealed mountains, hidden beneath a burning southern land, appear in the Book of Enoch, a text left outside the biblical canon nearly 2 millennia ago. Then, in 1958, Soviet scientists sent seismic waves through Antarctica's ice and found an entire mountain range no human eye had ever seen, buried beneath the surface. Suddenly, 7 mountains sealed from view no longer sounds like empty poetry. But this book was cut from the Bible for a reason. What did the Book of Enoch actually say? Why it stays buried, and what breaks the seal? Nothing under Antarctica was buried by anyone. It was buried by the one thing on Earth patient enough to hide a world, ice that entombs instead of destroys. But here is the detail that makes the entire story fold in on itself. The Gamburtsev Mountains are considered the birthplace of the East Antarctic ice sheet. When the climate cooled, snow settled on those high peaks first. It compacted into glaciers, the glaciers merged and spread, and the ice grew outward until it swallowed a continent, with its highest point, Dome A, sitting directly above the range that started it all. Read that again. The mountains built their own tomb. The first thing the ice buried was the thing that created the ice. If a myth maker wanted a perfect self-sealing prison, could they have designed it better than that? And that same, slow, cold-based ice answers the question in this video's title. Why was it buried? Because interior Antarctic ice does not scrape and destroy. It settles and preserves. That is why an entire river world can wait 34 million years in the dark without losing its shape, and why a possible extinction scar can stay unread for 250 million years. But the seal has an expiry condition. The researchers behind the 2023 discovery warned that our climate is heading toward the conditions of 14 to 34 million years ago, when the planet ran 3 to 7 degrees warmer, the very world those buried rivers last flowed through. The lid that held everything in place is the only one of Antarctica's mysteries currently scheduled to fail, which leaves the book. Judged as geography, the theory collapses. The text names no continent, and the 7 visible peaks were pattern-matched, not found. But judged as a shape, a story about a southern land where enormous things lie sealed beneath the surface until an appointed time, it turned out to be true in ways no prophet and no skeptic could have checked. What that means is yours to decide. The book was buried. The mountains were buried. The world beneath the ice was buried. Only one of those seals is now melting. The book, the Bible, left buried. Before we connect anything to Antarctica, you need to understand what this text actually is. Not a rumor, not an internet theory, a physical artifact. The Book of Enoch, scholars call it First Enoch, is a collection of writings structured across 5 distinct sections and 108 chapters. It circulated in Ethiopian religious tradition as far back as 160 BCE, centuries before the New Testament was even written. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still considers it scripture today, but when early church councils decided which books belonged in the Bible, this one was left out. Most Jewish and Christian authorities excluded it from their canon entirely. For over 1,000 years, the Western world barely knew it existed. Then, in the 18th century, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce traveled to Ethiopia and brought back manuscripts. Suddenly, European scholars could read what had been preserved in Ge'ez, an ancient Ethiopian language, for centuries. And what they found inside was unlike anything in the accepted Bible. 200 angels, the text calls them watchers, descend from heaven to the summit of Mount Hermon. That mountain is real. It sits on the border between modern Lebanon and Syria. According to the text, these 200 beings made a pact on that peak. They would leave their appointed place in heaven, take human wives, and teach humanity knowledge that was never meant to be shared. The teachings were specific: metallurgy, weapons making, enchantments, cosmetics, astrology. The text lists them like a curriculum. And the result, according to Enoch, was catastrophic. Violence spread across the earth, corruption followed, and the flood became inevitable. But the punishment is where it gets interesting. God doesn't simply destroy the Watchers, he imprisons them. The text describes them being bound and cast into darkness deep inside the earth, sealed away until a final judgment. The language is vivid: valleys of fire, layers of rock, chains of darkness. Enoch himself is taken on a journey to witness the prison. He describes what he sees in uncomfortable detail: mountains, fire, darkness, and a place that feels less like metaphor and more like coordinates. And yet the text never tells you where. Not once, in 108 chapters, does the Book of Enoch name a continent, a direction on a compass, or a recognizable landmark beyond Mount Hermon. The prison is described in extraordinary detail. Its location is completely absent. If the punishment was meant to be forgotten forever, why does the text describe the prison in such detail? For 2,000 years, that question had no answer. The prison had no address. Then, on a single broadcast in March 2017, someone gave it one. And the address he chose was the coldest, emptiest, most off-limits place on Earth. So who put Antarctica on the map of Enoch? And what exactly did he see in chapter 18? March 14th, 2017, the day the prophecy got coordinates. For 2,000 years, nobody knew where to put the prison. Then one broadcast changed everything. On March 14th, 2017, a commentator named Stephen Ben-Nun went live on a channel called Israeli News Live. He is not an archaeologist. He is not a biblical scholar. He is a religious commentator with a camera and a copy of the Book of Enoch. And on that broadcast, he did something no one had done before. He read specific verses out loud and pointed them at a specific place on the map. The verses were Enoch 18, starting at line 6 and running through 16. Here is what the text says, stripped to its essentials. Enoch describes being taken on a journey towards the south. He arrives at a place that is burning day and night. He sees 7 mountains of precious stones, 3 toward the east, 3 toward the south, and describes a land of deep darkness beyond them, a place where no flesh can walk. Ben-Nun's interpretation was direct. The journey south meant Antarctica. The 7 mountains of precious stones meant Mount Vinson, the highest peak on the continent, and 6 neighboring summits in the Sentinel Range. The burning land meant the volcanic activity scientists have confirmed beneath the ice. The prison of the Watchers, he argued, was under that ice right now. The broadcast spread fast. Within weeks, researcher Michael Salla amplified the theory on his exopolitics platform in April 2017, and prophecy channels and conspiracy forums ran with it. But here is where this video does something most of those channels never did. Start with the text itself. Burning day and night reads far more naturally as hellfire than as the coldest continent on Earth. In ancient apocalyptic literature, burning darkness is one of the oldest metaphors for divine judgment. Reading it as literal volcanic heat beneath the ice means skipping past the obvious interpretation to reach the dramatic one. Now look at the mountains. The Sentinel Range does not have exactly 7 prominent summits. It has more. Selecting precisely 7 meant choosing some peaks and ignoring others, fitting the geography to the verse rather than the other way around. That is not evidence. That is pattern matching. And this is the part no one in this debate seems to notice. Ben-Nun picked the one mountain range in Antarctica that climbers actually visit. Expeditions summit Mount Vinson every season. Photographers have captured it from every angle. But Enoch describes mountains that are sealed, hidden, bound, buried away from human sight until the end of days. Why would you look for a hidden prison in plain sight? Here is the twist that reshapes this entire conversation. The theory's mistake was not connecting Enoch to Antarctica. The mistake was choosing the wrong mountains. Because Antarctica does have a hidden mountain range, one as long as the European Alps, buried under more than half a kilometer of ice, never seen by any human eye. And scientists have known about it since 1958. What did Soviet instruments hear echoing back from beneath the dead center of the continent? The mountains no human has ever seen. Here is how you find something buried under a continent. In 1958, a team from the 3rd Soviet Antarctic Expedition traveled to the deep interior of East Antarctica, near a point so remote it has its own name, the southern pole of inaccessibility. They were not looking for mountains. The scientific consensus at the time was that the interior of Antarctica was flat bedrock beneath a smooth sheet of ice. There was no reason to expect anything else. The method was straightforward. You detonate a charge on the surface. The shock wave travels downward through the ice, hits bedrock, and bounces back. You time the echo. The longer it takes, the deeper the rock. Simple physics, but the echoes came back wrong. The return signals were arriving at different times across different stations. Not the uniform pattern you would expect from a flat bed, but a jagged, irregular signature. When the Soviet team processed the data, the picture that emerged was impossible to ignore. Beneath Dome A, under more than 600 meters of ice, sat an entire mountain range, peaks reaching somewhere between 2,700 and 3,400 meters, a span of roughly 1,200 kilometers, comparable to the European Alps in both length and height. No human eye had ever seen them. No human eye has seen them since. The discovery was published and confirmed, and then, for 50 years, almost nothing happened. The location was too remote, the ice too deep, the logistics too brutal. The Gamburtsev subglacial mountains sat in the scientific record like a footnote, real but untouched. It took until the International Polar Year of 2007 to change that. A seven-nation coalition launched the AGAP survey, Antarctica's Gamburtsev Province project, deploying ice-penetrating radar across the region. The campaign was completed on February 25, 2009, and the results confirmed everything the Soviet seismic data had suggested. Dr. Fausto Ferraccioli of the British Antarctic Survey verified the range's structure beneath the ice sheet. Alps-scale mountains, fully intact, sealed under a frozen lid hundreds of meters thick. Geophysicist Robin Bell from Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory put it in terms that should bother everyone. "We have physical samples from the surface of the moon," she noted, "rocks astronauts carried home with their hands. But we do not have a single rock sample from the Gamburtsev Mountains. A range on our own planet, and 67 years after its discovery, no human being has ever touched it." Then, in 2025, researchers found a way to read its age without reaching it. A team led by Nathan Datsko of Macquarie University and Jacqueline Halpin of the University of Tasmania used zircon geochronology, dating microscopic mineral grains carried by ancient rivers out from under the ice, to establish that the Gamburtsevs formed roughly 500 million years ago during the assembly of the supercontinent Gondwana. The researchers described the range's survival as deeply puzzling. Antarctica is tectonically dead. Mountains erode. These should not still exist at this scale, yet they do, perfectly preserved in cold darkness for 500 million years. We've physically held pieces of the moon, so why, after 67 years, has no one touched a single rock from mountains sitting on our own planet? Now here is what this chapter is not saying. This is not proof that the Book of Enoch predicted the Gamburtsev Mountains. That would be a claim no honest video can make. But here is what this chapter is saying. The most dramatic element of the Enoch Antarctica theory, vast mountains sealed beneath the far south, hidden from human sight, is, minus the angels, a verified geophysical fact, and the mountains were only the beginning. In 2023, a team scanning East Antarctica found something that shouldn't exist under 2 kilometers of ice. Not rock, but a landscape. Rivers, valleys, ridges, frozen mid-moment, bigger than an entire European country. How does a whole world stay perfectly preserved for 34 million years? And why did no one see it until now? A lost world bigger than Belgium. To understand what was found, you first need to understand why it survived. Not all ice moves the same way. At the edges of Antarctica, glaciers grind forward under their own weight, scraping bedrock clean, erasing everything beneath them. But deep in the interior, where temperatures are coldest and the ice is thickest, something different happens. The base of the ice sheet never melts. It sits still. Cold-based, slow-moving ice does not carve, it entombs. Whatever was underneath when the ice arrived stays exactly as it was, sealed, untouched, frozen, mid-moment. In October 2023, a paper published in Nature Communications revealed what that preservation actually looks like. Professor Stuart Jameson, a glaciologist at Durham University, led a team analyzing data from the ISOCAP Airborne Survey. a series of flights conducted between 2008 and 2011 over the Aurora subglacial basin and the Totten Glacier region of East Antarctica. The method was radio echo sounding. Radar pulses fired downward from aircraft, passing through kilometers of ice and bouncing off the bedrock below. When the team assembled the returns into a coherent picture, they were not looking at flat rock. They were looking at a landscape, rivers, valleys, ridges, a terrain shaped by flowing water, carved by tributaries, structured exactly the way land looks before ice buries it, except this land had been buried for up to 34 million years. The landscape stretched 300 kilometers wide, bigger than Belgium, an entire pre-glacial world, perfectly preserved beneath the ice sheet, older than the first whales. Jameson's own words carry the weight better than any paraphrase. "No one has laid eyes on it," he said. "The bedrock of Antarctica," he noted, "remains less well known than the surface of Mars." That was 2023. Then came the escalation. In July 2025, a follow-up study led by Professor Neil Ross, professor of polar science and environmental geophysics at Newcastle University, expanded the picture dramatically. Ross's team identified river-formed flat surfaces beneath a 3,500-kilometer stretch of East Antarctica's coastline. That is roughly 40% of the entire East Antarctic coast. Ross described how researchers had been finding puzzling fragments of flat, buried landscapes for decades without being able to connect them. This study connected them. The river systems were not isolated. They were everywhere. The climate implications are severe. The last time those rivers flowed, global temperatures were 3 to 7 degrees Celsius warmer than today. That landscape is a snapshot of what Antarctica looks like without its ice, and the conditions that created it are the conditions our climate is moving toward. There were rivers flowing there before the first whales existed, so if the ice ever retreats, what condition would a 34-million-year-old landscape actually be in? Preserved worlds and hidden mountains are wonders, but the next discovery is not a wonder. It is a wound. In the gravity field over Wilkes Land, satellites detected a scar hundreds of kilometers wide, and the leading explanation ties it to the moment life on Earth nearly ended. What could hit a planet hard enough to leave a mark still readable from orbit a 250 million years later? The scar in the gravity field. Here is how you see something buried under 2 kilometers of ice without ever touching it. Between 2002 and 2017, twin satellites called GRACE orbited Earth in formation, one following the other by 220 kilometers. As they passed over the planet's surface, variations in the mass below denser rock, thinner crust, hidden structures tugged one satellite slightly ahead or pulled the other slightly behind. Dense mass below meant a stronger tug, a gravity spike logged continuously. In 2009, geophysicist Ralph von Fries at Ohio State University published findings in Geochemistry, Geophysics, Geosystems, a journal of the American Geophysical Union, that identified exactly that kind of spike. Beneath Wilkes Land, in East Antarctica, the GRACE data revealed a mass concentration sitting inside a subglacial depression roughly 500 kilometers in diameter. Von Fries's team modeled the anomaly as a dense mantle plug, approximately 425 kilometers wide and 5 kilometers thick, consistent with what you would expect if something enormous had struck the Earth and punched through the crust, allowing heavier mantle rock to well upward and freeze in place. The possible timing, approximately 260 million years ago, near the boundary of Earth's greatest mass extinction, the Permian-Triassic event, when roughly 90% of all species died. But von Fries was not the first to notice something wrong under Wilkes Land. In 1962, a researcher named Schmidt flagged an anomaly in the region. In 1976, John Weihaupt measured a subglacial structure 243 kilometers across, at least 848 meters deep. In 1979, Charles Bentley challenged the interpretation, arguing the data was insufficient. Weihaupt responded in 2010 with updated analysis. Then in 2018, Klokochnik and colleagues applied newer satellite gravity models and returned with larger numbers, roughly 510 kilometers across, at least 1,500 meters of relief. Every time instruments improved, the anomaly got bigger, 60 years of measurements, and the crater keeps getting bigger with every better instrument. So at what point does an anomaly become an answer? Honesty requires two caveats. First, no one has ever drilled into this structure. No bedrock sample exists. The ice is too thick, the location too remote. The impact hypothesis remains exactly that, a hypothesis. Second, a 2015 study proposed an alternative explanation entirely. The gravity signature could reflect hyperextended crust from an ancient rift system, thinned rock from tectonic stretching, not an impact at all. And yes, this is the same anomaly that some theorists have called a buried craft, or the sealed prison of the Watchers. But here is the irony: no one in those communities seems to appreciate. The sober, peer-reviewed, scientifically cautious version of what might be under Wilkes Land is darker than the myth. Not angels in chains, the readable fingerprint of the event that nearly ended all complex life on Earth, sealed under ice, unsampled, unconfirmed, waiting. Mountains, a lost world, a possible extinction scar. 3 discoveries sharing one common fact. All of them are sealed under kilometers of ice, and none has ever been touched, which raises the question this whole video has been building toward. The Book of Enoch promised something hidden beneath Antarctica, and the instruments agree. Unseen mountains, a lost river world untouched for 34 million years, a 500-kilometer scar in the gravity field. Prophecy, coincidence, or a truth stranger than both? Which discovery under the ice unsettles you most, and would you want the drill to reach it? Tell us below.